I'm tired of Clair Obscur Expedition 33. You're tired of hearing about Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I'm tired of hearing about it too. Tired of thinking about it. Tired of all the awards it got. Tired of being imprisoned as a cognitive captive. The French in their ilk, my wardens. I yearn only to be free of their vile foreign influence. But there is something that has been bothering me, and it's probably been bothering you too. It's the ending. I've been thinking about it for almost a year now, and it's just that I found myself unsatisfied with the ending. And not because I didn't understand the what, why, and how of it. I felt I had a good grasp of those. After finishing the game, I looked at some comments online and, unsurprisingly, saw that there was a split between people who had picked Verso's ending and Miles' ending, deeming that their choice was the correct one. Pretty normal. A little surprisingly, I also saw comments of people with the sentiment saying that both endings are bad, or that neither ending is good or bad, that it is up to interpretation. You know, wishy-washy, non-committal, fence-sitting behavior. In many heated discussions, you'll tend to find that group of people who like to downplay the conversation in this way. These people are just the worst. They contribute nothing to it, and are often just saying that to look good by claiming the high ground. But what was actually surprising was that the developers were saying this. Lead writer Jennifer Svedberg had this to say. I tell everyone there is no correct ending. There is no canon ending. There is no official Sandfall ending. Both endings are there for a reason. We put them both there for a reason. They were designed in a very particular way. Neither is perfect. Both are heartbreaking in their own ways. What? Surely she's not talking about my game of the year, Clair Obscur? Well, that just can't be. Surely there's some kind of mistake. This is Balderdash. This had been bothering me. These lingering words, whispering sweet evils to my ear, gnawing at my innards like a poisonous mineral, suggesting the most terrible and vile of all things, that I did not understand the developer's intent. But you've played the game, right? You better have. I didn't put any spoiler warnings. You have to know that the endings are extreme. To make a moral equivalence out of them, well, it just feels wrong. I couldn't understand how someone who wrote this game, this wonderful game for wonderful people, would get to that position. If you are a serious person making moral decisions in a video game seriously, then it is clear, based on what we see, that not only is there a correct ending, but it's Verso's. Verso's ending is painful. You have to watch Lune's and Ciel's future be ripped away from them again. You have to watch Monoko and Esquier come in and give their friend one last goodbye. And you have to accept that the gommaged populace of Lumiere will never be brought back. But with it carries a conclusion. The canvas is gone. The cracked and hollow boy, whose visage resembles the decayed painter's and curator after spending far too much time on the canvas, is set free. The Desandras now must move forward with their lives, however reluctantly. Maëlle must move forward. It is the result you want for yourself or someone you know who is afflicted by grief. It feels more satisfying. Maëlle's, on the other hand, is horrifying. Any sympathy you might have had for Verso is thrown at you as you watch him beg for his end, only for it to be denied. Then strutted onto a stage as a puppet, more tired, more old than ever. In a world propped up to serve people's ideals, Gustave is back. Ciel's husband is back. But there's a strange tenseness to the air. And as Verso appears on stage, the scene shifts to black and white. At the end, we see the painting marks on Maëlle's face. refusing to let us forget the consequences of letting her live out this delusion in a hyper-real world. For thinking, for even a second, that she was telling the truth when she promised that she wouldn't be consumed by the canvas like her mother. While this ending saves the most life, it comes at the sacrifice of Alicia and who she could be. In any other story, Mael would be the JRPG protagonist. She is a troubled teen having trouble fitting in at home. She doesn't yet have a full grasp on her identity, but even so, it is clear to her that she is different. There is discomfort in the comfortable. The people of Lumiere are faced with the existential crisis of the Gamage, and yet they drum along, accepting it, even making a celebration out of it. And Mael does not understand why. So when the call to adventure arrives, she takes it, partly to help Lumiere, but also as a form of escape. This is a typical start to a hero's journey, which we have seen countless times. And you would be right in guessing that throughout such a story, Mael would meet a mentor, pass through an ordeal, achieve the goal of the adventure, then come back a changed and realized person. But that is interrupted, and not once, twice. Alicia went into the canvas with the intention of dragging out her mother, who had been latching on to the fantasy family she painted to cope with Verso's death. And being that she was the one whose naivety was used by the writers to kill Verso, Alicia feels guilt. Not just about him, but what it's done to the family. She was to take the call to adventure, explore the world of the canvas, work together with Renoir and Clea, confront the challenge of Aline's might, and the same temptation that traps her there. Overcome the ordeal of her grief and guilt, bring Aline out of the canvas, and in the process, come out a changed and realized person. But upon entering, her whole being was overwritten with Aline's will and completely reborn into that world as a resident of Lumiere. The story of Alicia put on pause. 16 years later, in her journey as an expeditioner, Mael finds out too late that her goal of defeating the Paintress actually results in the opposite of what their mission was. She had been betrayed by her guide and mentor. While Alicia's story was interrupted at the beginning, Mael's is interrupted near the end. The character growth she would have earned from grieving the loss of Gustave, fulfilling his expedition's goal, and living on in his absence, all of that is retroactively warped when Alicia's memories come back and Mael's reborn as a paintress. Death is no longer death. It is a mistake that can be blotted out with a brush. Despite living almost 2 lives, Mael comes out of the experience not only still incomplete, but with more baggage.
You treat me as if I'm still 5!
I treat you as if the shadow from the worst day of our lives is going to suffocate you and take you from us too!
This is the tone of an angsty teenager. Her naive but true feelings are that there is no other place for her but in the canvas, and she is convinced of this. Having lived twice the isolating life as an adolescent, but having never seen past that, Mael has been pushed into this emotional corner. And so for her there is no other option. She must protect her home. Verso is maybe even more desperate. Having been created immortal by his mother, he has been trapped in the canvas for 67 years. 67 years with the knowledge that he is the root cause for why there was a fracture in his mother's slow decay. That is bad. Having been made to live in a world so long, so miserably, he has grown jaded, cynical, and tired of it all. He seeks to remove the Paintress not just to free his mother, but himself. He does this knowingly that doing so will enable Renoir to gommage everyone left. But it is not because he wants to. In fact, he has made strong bonds with several people of Lumiere. He even helps Mael in her effort to fight back against Renoir in Act 3 because he wants to preserve the canvas. It is his home after all, and with Aline removed, he hopes to be able to live peacefully there. And he almost goes through with it, except for when he sees that visage of his mother, suffocating on the floor, her staggered, grasping breaths echoing throughout the room. This is the consequence of trying to live in the canvas. and yet she is still trying to go back in. It is clear to Verso at this point that believing that she will move on while the canvas still stands is a naive delusion, and so he is left with no other choice. That is how you set a good stage. In many ways, Expedition 33 feels like the first video game I've played that feels like a modern Shakespeare tragedy. Yes, I'm unironically calling this Shakespeare. Sandfall have earned it. They have done an amazing job in not only creating these grounded, self-contradicting characters who all have motivations we can clearly understand and sympathize with, but also in crafting these drastic situations where the beauty and misery of the human experience are painted. Sophie and Gustav are a couple who clearly still love each other, but break up because of their disagreements over having a child. Sophie cannot bear the idea of having a child in a world so miserable and short-lived. Gustav still wants one in spite of this. Before anything can be resolved, Sophie's time runs out and is gommaged in front of Gustav, the door between them closed forever. Take out the fantastical element and you have a situation that only seems realistic. And this happens in the first 20 minutes of the game, and it almost made me cry. Gustav is now my boy. I am now a patriot of Lumiere. For those who come after. Just, why would you gommage it all away, Act 3? Why? The setup and execution of Act 1 is great. Really great. It is particularly good about making you care about this cast. And caring about this cast might be the most important job due to how it connects to the game's themes, which we'll get into later. What is important now is understanding that this is the biggest underlying motivation between why people end up picking Mael's ending. They want to complete the original goal of the game, and give those characters the happy ending they deserve. But is it a happy ending? If you go to a YouTube video of that ending's cutscene, you will see a lot of comments from people who picked it and have mild remorse, many describing it as horrifying. Or people who picked Verso's glad, happy even that they made the decision they did. That ending certainly did not come off as happy to most people. So yes, it is not a happy ending, but is that so surprising? The writer herself just said that that there was no such thing as a good ending, that both were tragic in their own way, blah blah, yada yada. But herein lies my problem. It did not feel that way when I played. When I got into Act 3 and learned the truth of the story's premise, I immediately took Renoir's side. For you see, I have good instincts. I knew ahead of time that Monster Hunter Wilds was going to implement features that would alienate Monster Hunter World players, be bad, and have terrible performance. I knew that Metroid Prime 4 was always going to be bad. And I knew, from right when it was announced, that the Steam machine was never going to be $600, $700. Now, I did feel conflicted for a while, seeing as I had been so invested in that premise of the game. Humanity fighting back against a malevolent deity that is oppressing them? JRPG story that emphasizes the indomitable human spirit? Yes please, I love that shit. But ultimately, I thought that if this world was a construction holding the family back, the best option would be to burn it, to leave it behind. And when I got to the end, I was relieved that there was Verso's choice for me to pick. Seeing that Verso's choice was made out of the process of elimination, to defend it, we must likewise argue for why the alternative sucks, and is untenable. Here I have taken the strongest arguments, and we will break them down one by one. Okay, so the first argument I'm going to tackle is about Mael. From how I described her story earlier, she is very much a victim of both the writer's plot, but more importantly, how her family treats her following it. We only see Clea briefly in the game, so it is unclear if she was always this cold-hearted, but her interactions with Alicia are not good. She calls Alicia naive, useless, and goes as far as blaming her for why the feud in the canvas is even happening. That is harsh. It does nothing to console Alicia or bring her up. It will only bring her down. Now this isn't to say that Clea hates her, she does care about her family. Her efforts are solely towards the outcome of avenging Verso by fighting back against the threat of the Riders. And her words reflect that. But words matter. They influence how Alicia feels about herself, and at this point she is already quite low. Directly reminding her about her mistakes and insufficiencies is taking a knife and cutting open a scar that is not fully healed. What about her mother, who as a parent is typically charged with ensuring her well-being? Well, she ran off to the canvas to create a fake family and live out life there, essentially abandoning her. And worse, her mother secretly blames her for Verso's death and takes it out on the painted Alicia, who still bears the scars of the fire, is mute and painted monochrome, as if she is supposed to be a fading reminder that there ever was a fire. Renoir's relation to her is different. He appears to be the only one who seriously looks out for her. He still shows her love, does not blame her for what happened, and continues to assert that she can reach her potential. This is best shown, of course, through the axon he created to represent her, called She Who Grasps the Sky, a mountainous puppet building a scaffolding tower. The tower itself is in a secluded area, off the west coast, only accessible in the game's third act, following an optional side quest. And the axon we see walking around is a shell, with the real one controlling it inside. I particularly love the detail that the enemy Nevrons in the area are also building, as if inspired by the axon to aim high as well. Renoir is expressing to his daughter here that even isolated, she has the potential to reach high and create something good, and that goodness will reach and influence those below. Now, this is a very positive message, but perhaps too positive for Maëlle, who isn't in the right frame of mind to accept those high expectations. There's this almost funny interaction between Maëlle and Verso here, where they're discussing the meaning behind this axon, and Maëlle complains about how,
And Papa knows I have vertigo.
she views her own self, her own condition, as being unsuited for her place in the family. Parental expectations are a common prison that children struggle with, but it is a prison nonetheless. This is a core argument for the pro-Maëlle ending people. They correctly identify that Maëlle has been living in a prison crafted by her family, one that is hard to break out of. And so they view this ending as a way for Maëlle to escape and flee the prison where she can live with a different family and friends who wish the best for her. But here's the thing. There is a larger prison surrounding it all. She can run away from her family through the canvas, but she's still trapped in the mental prison crafted by her adolescent worldview and grief. What is ironic about that Vertigo scene in The Reacher is that she's kind of missing the point. The flying Renoir is talking about here is metaphorical. He just wants Alicia to break out of her mindset that is grounding her. And in fact, she had broken out of it as Maëlle. We first saw her running around on rooftops in Lumiere. She never had vertigo. In the canvas, vertigo is a nonsense concept, and the fact we see her bring it up once she is Alicia again is evidence that she is holding herself back. So, is it really better for Maëlle to have given herself the reins? Ask yourself this. How does someone learn? They might go to school or read a book. That information is prescribed by an authority. It is already assumed to be true, and so for the most part, you can just memorize it. What is the other option? You learn from scratch. If you are learning how to use a tool, you try using it one way, observe whether the result is good or bad, try a different way, and iterate on that until you master it. Basically, you learn through experience as you observe which inputs get which outputs. But this can't happen in the canvas. That world is not designed to give an honest output. Maëlle is its painter now, and its reality will bend to her will. The consequences of actions she takes in there, even death, can be undone, and as such she cannot gain real experience. It goes back to how I described the hero's journey. She is stuck in the ordeal phase with no way out, in a perpetual state of unfinished adolescence, in a numbing comfort where she does not gain but only loses herself. I can understand people's intentions. They want the best for Mael, and the instinct to want her to fight against the control of her family isn't a bad one. In fact, it's often part of the process of maturing. But that's not what's happening here. This stage is designed to keep her living on as a teenager, and for many, those years were their worst. I have seen some Renoir slander, claiming that he is attempting to force closure, force resolution, force finality on Mael's process of grief by erasing this one last connection to Verso. Now I understand where this sentiment comes from. He is effectively destroying an important part of Verso's memory, a memorabilia. And grief is a very personal process that does not have a set expiration date. It might take 5 years, it might take 10 years, it might not ever end. And during this process, you can't just force yourself to move on. That results in repression that prolongs the pain and negatively affects you down the line. That is generally where people are coming from. They have likely been in or seen a similar situation, where that one little comfort was the only thing that helped them keep going until things got better, even if that took a long time. But here's the problem. This argument is built from an illusion. The canvas produces a simulated world with a living, breathing copy of Verso. It is not comparable to any memorabilia we can imagine. Like a photo album, it is a hyper-real world. A world with people who feel emotion and pain so similarly to us that it is impossible not to treat them as real. So I say this. If processing grief is living in absence, then how could living in the canvas ever help with grief? Is Verso not effectively being replaced? Aline and Mael are clearly treating him as such, or else they wouldn't go through such lengths to protect a stranger. What would happen if Renoir had never entered the canvas and fought back against Aline? If she had lived a comfortable, pleasant 100 years without Verso, would she then have slowly forgotten her memories with the old Verso? We can't really know the answer to that hypothetical, but I think it gets my point across. The canvas has the capability of completely consuming a person. It is like comfort on crack. So, is Renoir really forcing them to move on? It would be more accurate to say that he is attempting to force them to start grieving. To start at step 1. Not pull yourself together and move on to the next thing. Look at the ending cutscene for Verso's ending. The family is present at the grave of Verso, which is a form of honoring and remembering his life, the opposite of rushing past grief. You might be thinking, this isn't quite right. The idea of this closure has more to do with the direction. Renoir is forcibly putting the family in the direction he wants them to be in. And I would agree with you. It is better and moral for the person to be guided into changing direction on their own accord. But remember, this is crack and the addict is essentially living in it. What chance do they have to quit on their own? Now, I'm not fully defending Renoir. He is desperate and controlling. He does need the family to move on for his own sake, and the actions he takes are extreme. However justified they might seem to you when you look at the situation by the time of Act 3. His need for control is his biggest flaw, and later I will talk more about the negative implications of that. But what I'm trying to say is that from what we see of him in the game, the idea that he is trying to resolve the family's grief himself is exaggerated. There's a good case to make that what Clea does, although her goal is the same, is unnecessarily cruel to the expeditioners. But for Renoir, we do not see that. In large part, he is doing what he is doing because he has been in a similar situation before. One of the logs mentions that at one point, Renoir, like Aline now, was trapped in a canvas, and it was she who saved him. So from his perspective, he has all the reason in the world to be terrified that the same can and is happening to Aline and Mael. I think because Renoir's situation is broadly reminiscent of someone who reacts by cutting off attachment, compartmentalizing it all, then getting frustrated with other people who are not on the same page, that people are jumping to a conclusion. And maybe that is what was intended, but if so, I would say the evidence is lacking and we would need to see more examples where he does act like this, such as being overbearing to his children in a flashback or something. Otherwise, with how much weaker he is than Aline, only getting to a stalemate thanks to Clea, then ultimately leaving the canvas before the final decision is made, I can really only see Renoir as representing the weak line of reason from our consciousness. That of which would have helped had we just listened to it, which we all have, and that is almost always certainly drowned out by our emotions. This is the elephant drawn on the canvas in the room. The voice acting, emotionally swelling music, motion capturing, all of these elements that the game has won awards over are clearly and intently used to humanize the residents of Lumiere and make them feel as real, if not more real, than the Desandras. They certainly feel more human in that we like them more, and I include myself in that we. Even though right now I'm arguing in favor of Verso, my personal favorite character is Gustave, and it's not even close. Again, that beginning 20 minutes of the game with the parting of Sophie, immediately engaging. Particularly with how realistic their eyes dart, the way Sophie subtly cries as the monolith's number changes, Gustave's facial expression as he watches her gommage rose petals drift away, it's just fantastic. You feel for Gustave more than even some people you know. After arriving on the beach, in a matter of minutes the expedition is massacred. His friends massacred. Gustave's reaction to this is not just falling on his knees and screaming out. It is a panic attack that he has to let subside before being able to walk forward. There's a quiet helplessness to this scene that really struck out with me. His listless stare, the way his eye twitches after seeing the bodies in the cave and Lune stopping him before Persona 3ing himself. This is how I would react to this situation. Overwhelmed. So yes, the characters feel real, they have emotions, struggles, aspirations, and virtues. Expedition 33 succeeds in its goal in having its artificial characters take real moral agency in the minds of its players. I will not argue against that. I don't even have the merit nor ability to argue whether or not they are real. Great media like Blade Runner have brought up this question about the value of artificial life for years now. Is there a line in the sand you can draw to differentiate real people from the artificial? And that's an open-ended question, which they have certainly done with more nuance and artfulness than I could. So no, I am not touching that argument. In fact, I argue the opposite. That these characters are more than real, they are hyper-real. So, with that being the case, what I will say about specifically the worth of the lives in the canvas, even though they are equal to everyone else, is that the argument for them just does not feel very persuasive. The game implies that because there are multiple artists, that there are multiple canvases. So, the question comes up, what is preventing Maëlle or Aline from just taking everyone from Lumiere and painting them somewhere else? Now, that's a stupid question. Unless it isn't. The developers have been using painting as a metaphor, of course, and with paintings, only the original has the essence, the soul, which is a big part of our attachment to them. We don't go to the museum for a copy of the Mona Lisa, we come to see the original, if we can. The Desandras fight over the canvas and not any other canvas, because it is the one that Verso painted in. It is the one that has a piece of his soul. You could paint everyone into another canvas, but that would likely just be imperfect copies without that soul. A perfect example of this is the Gestrels and their sacred river. Gestrels, oftentimes, die and then are put into a queue with the other dead Gestrels to be revived in the river by reusing their chroma. This revival is not exactly free, however. Afterwards, the Gestrels will lose some of their memory, essentially being reborn into a new person. With an ink pen, you can't just erase it and try again. You have to commit. Maybe you can try to blot it out and color over it, but wet ink will blend, leaving a trace of the original but blurred. Not quite new, not quite the original. Exactly how chroma works is left vague, but given that the dead Gestrels were placed in jars, I think preservation of this residual chroma is important to the degree that this revive works. Mael is able to quickly revive Ciel and Lune because they were gommaged not that long beforehand, and the dead expeditioners cannot be fully revived because their chroma is old. So this raises a new question. How old was Pierre, Ciel's husband's, chroma? You see, Pierre died in an accident about 6 years ago. He was not gommaged. And yet there he is in Mael's ending. At what point would his chroma have dissipated to a point where he couldn't be fully revived? Maybe Pierre is something similar to Painted Verso, or someone else's memories are being used to create an accurate picture. Verso could be an exception though, because the painting he is in has part of the original soul, but hypothetically, this simulated Pierre appears to be accurate enough for Ciel. Look how happy she is. So now I ask the question again. If you had the time and collected the memories of the people in the canvas, could you just paint them into another canvas? Would that be good enough? I suspect you could, but like the Gestrals, it wouldn't be perfect. There would still be something missing. But also like the Gestrals, you do it anyway. Monoko still sees value and solace in reviving Noko despite his damaged memories. You might disagree with this hypothetical, since from a story perspective, it would be more compelling and tragic for the characters to be irreplaceable. But what you can't disagree with is that at the end of the day, we treat them all like video game characters. We non-consensually dress them up in silly costumes and build attachments to certain characters if we can make a build work that min-maxes for maximum damage. I know for a fact one of the reasons I liked Gustav so much was because he had that BBC, that big dick damage ultimate attack. And the painters treat them like objects too, including Mael. Verso pleads to be erased and she denies him that. They are chroma on the canvas. They can be created and they can be erased. Even if you pick Mael's ending, you are still just reviving them, almost recreating them since Renoir gommaged everyone on arrival. And this makes it feel just a bit hollow. It's like when One Piece does a fake character death. You've already spent my emotions on this character I thought was gonna die. Am I happy I get to see the character again? Sure, but it just doesn't hit the same. I really wish that Sandoval had done something to address this disconnect. I was thinking about this a lot, and what would have really helped to give this argument some more conceptual weight would have been to have some, not even direct implication, but some implication that the painters themselves lived in a painted world. That, and exactly that, would have blurred this line between, Okay, so I missed this piece of dialogue when I first played. And it's not my fault. Not my fault. I blame the structure of Act 3. The game, this entire time, had been signposting to me that, when story progresses, check back in with everyone at camp. Simple, right? No! Apparently, when Act 3 starts, you can talk to everyone at camp, but you then need to set up camp again to initiate these new side quests. That's stupid. You can easily just go off and finish the game, and miss them, which are pretty important to the context of the story, and... Okay, we need to talk about the simulation. What is this dialogue, you, viewer who was also led astray by the bad signposting, might ask? Well, after completing Lune's side quest, there will be a new piece of dialogue at camp, where she mentions that Mael is planning on creating a painting depicting the outside world for all to view. A painting in a painting. So yeah, this adds in a lot of questions without answers, and how much this matters depends. Like, what did Mael mean when she says she'll make a canvas depicting the real world? A core part of the proposed evidence behind simulation theory is whether or not civilization is able to create their own simulation, because then the implication is that, statistically, we would likely also be in someone else's simulation. So, if she can create a canvas that actually simulates a world, can only she or someone with this gift of painting be able to do this? And would someone from the canvas be able to use it? If so, then yeah, it's all a simulation. Maybe the writers are in a level of the simulation above the painters. Maybe they are meant to represent fate. And we could keep going from there. But asking hypothetical questions within a hypothetical question is not something concrete enough to be worth it. So let's just say this part of the argument is a draw, alright? Okay, but what about their happiness? Well, ultimately the people of Lumiere are still being controlled by God, so the degree they can be left genuinely happy is up to the benevolence of God Emperor Mael. Verso is clearly not happy, being forced to play the piano like this. But let's say you hate Verso. What about people you like Gustave and Mael? While Gustave, of course, served for the cause of Lumiere, he did not die for it. He died for Mael. At the end of Act 1, it would have been better for the mission had he abandoned her. He had the Lumina converter. Despite having a sister and friends in Lumiere, he still chose to save Mael. And this was not just a spur-of-the-moment decision either. Listen to his conversation earlier with Lune while they are tracking Mael.
I am not letting Mael die out here. I'm taking her home.
What? No, we have a mission!
Oh, fuck the mission! Fuck the mission, Lune! What are we gonna do, huh? Tell me. What are we gonna do? We're gonna take down the Paintress, just the three of us?
Here, he has already given up on the mission. His top priority changed. They later laugh off his fuck the mission statement, but I don't think he ever really changed his mind. So, would Gustave be in support of what Mael does here if he knew what was really happening? I think the answer would be no. And everyone else? Maybe they're happy for now, but for how long? If Mael would not let Verso die, then she might do the same for others. In a world without death, what would happiness even mean? The very conception of meaning would be altered, and it is not obvious if that would be for the better, considering life is only precious in so much as it is fragile. Now, preventing death obviously sounds like it would be a good thing. Medicine, for example, prevents it in many cases, and we celebrate that. However, I personally suspect that the degree to this matters. Ecosystems are equipped to handle small changes that fall within the norm, but are completely disrupted by an invasive species or climate change. The human mind is like that. It is like a garden. It is not equipped to handle a psychological change as large as the removal of death. As such, it seems reasonable to be skeptical about something that seems so good, even too good. I mean, look at what happened to the internet. The increased communication and connections seemed to be only a good thing at the time, but now just look at it. I only need to say the term social media, and the stigma around it speaks for itself. So, what does all this say about the people picking Mael's ending? That they love the characters even so much as to ignore what is commonly accepted as healthy, so long as it means preventing them from being erased outright? Well, yeah. And that is part of the problem the game is trying to point out. One of the themes of Expedition 33 is about over-attachment. Aline is overly attached to the painted Verso in the canvas world. Mael to Gustave in her life in Lumiere. Even Verso builds bonds with many of the expeditioners despite his objectives. The attachment to the canvas, this symbolic part of Verso's soul, is what is keeping the Desandra family fixated on what would otherwise be a peaceful world. The fracture, Gommage, Nevrons, the slaughtering of expedition after expedition, all from a cycle of grief. And so, when you pick Mael's ending out of an attachment to these characters, you are playing a part in that cycle. When Mael dies in the canvas, will Aline return in another fracture play out? Will other members of the family try to get in and push Mael out before then? That future is unclear, but certainly does not look bright. The online reaction to Mael's ending, the reactions of horror and disgust, make it feel like this was the intended lesson. As if the ending looks so bad on purpose. There are even other video essays out there which frame it as a vehicle to expose the players to themselves. But that is not what is going on here. This last point is about Verso. I've talked a lot about Mile already, since she is the tentpole around the argument supporting the canvas. And as such, naturally, those people on the other side have made arguments against Verso. They either dislike him or outright say he is a bad person, that he lied and manipulated the members of Expedition 33 into killing the Paintress, ultimately betraying their goal. While people in support of this ending paint the broader philosophy of his actions as moral, the other side focuses on his actual character. They point to his actions of killing his lover, betraying and causing the death of his painted family, allowing Gustav to die, lying multiple times to the expedition, and ultimately betraying them again after promising to earn their trust again. They say that these make him an immoral, perhaps psychopathic person who should absolutely not be given the reins to decide the canvas's fate. They're right. Not only are they right, but what they are right about is something so important to the overall story that it dwarfs all other arguments. Honestly, it should be the only one they use. They undersell it, people on Verso's side downplay it, and it is something I did not even think about until I had to redraft this very video essay. To explain it, I'm going to have to do something a bit odd. Explain why lying is bad. I know, it sounds silly, we all know that. But what I need to do is impose just how bad lying is. Lying, at its core, is about bending reality to your will. This is a trope in much of children's stories, so you can probably picture this in your head. A child does something they're not supposed to. Maybe they broke a vase or ate out of the cookie jar, and when the parent asks who did it, the child lies and said they did not do it or that so-and-so did it. We know why they did it, to avoid punishment, to escape the consequences of their actions. It's for themselves. And in these simple scenarios, we objectively know why doing this is bad and would be bad to continue doing so. But what about an adult in a complex scenario? Well, we can certainly point at examples of people in the real world who have lied, tried to avoid taking responsibility for their actions, and which ended in a bad result, one that made everyone's lives worse. Depending on who you were thinking of, it might be hard to understand why they did it, especially if it affected many people. But the reason is the same as the child's: selfishness. But in the case of an adult, there is a deliberate arrogance. There's some idea formed in their head about what they want, usually with two ugly assumptions built in. One of them is that what they want would be good for them, others, or the world. The other is that they know better than others, that what they already know is sufficient, perfect even, for achieving their goal. In essence, they believe that their aim and direction towards said aim are correct. That they have considered everything, all the variables that are necessary, and that there's no new information that would change anything and is therefore unwanted, and they be left unchallenged. And that's the problem. How would you ever know if that direction and aim are even in alignment? Or if the philosophy behind them is good to begin with, if you do not test it against the real world? Okay, I've talked a lot in the abstract, but to fully illustrate how this relates to Verso's character, I'm going to have to draw a comparison point to another story. One you may have been forced to read in high school: William Shakespeare's Othello. That's right. I made that small comparison earlier in the video to prime you, to ready your hearts, which may have been hardened by the public education system, to be opened as is mine now, to the joys of Shakespeare in this play's thematic similarities to Expedition 33. The play is set in 16th century Venice, and is mainly about two characters. The titular Othello is a vetted and respected general for the Venetian army, who is called the Moor due to his ethnic background. He has just married the beautiful daughter of a senator, Desmona. Iago, on the other hand, is a low-ranking officer under Othello, whom he seeks to take revenge on over having been passed upon promotion, picking the young, inexperienced Cassio instead. Or at least that is the pretense he gives us in the first scene while talking to Rodrigo, a poor bastard who he is scamming money out of under a different pretense, being that he will help hook him up with Desmona. Iago is infamously the main character of a play he's not named after. He takes center stage as the puppeteer, Playing the role of a friend, a trusted advisor, he uses his position to lie and manipulate the cast into doing the bidding of his revenge plot against Othello, of which culminates into literally gaslighting Othello into thinking he got cucked. Truly, Shakespeare was ahead of his time. Iago is an interesting villain in that, as he says, "I am not what I am." He is neither villain for villain's sake, nor a character with reasons justifying his actions. And this has caused the discussion around him even now to rely on some interpretation. Being passed on promotion you felt you deserved is certainly a reason to dislike your superior, but even after he orchestrates Cassio's demotion and putting himself in a better position, he doesn't stop. He kicks Cassio while he's down and snares him into the plot by implicating him having an affair with Desdemona. It is revealed later by Iago that there were rumors that Othello and his wife Emilia slept around. Quote, "And it is thought abroad that twixt my sheets he has done my office. I know not if 't be true, but I, for mere suspicion in that kind, will do as if for surety. For that I do suspect the lusty Moor hath leaped into my seat, the thought whereof doth, like a poisonous mineral, gnaw my innards, and nothing can or shall content my soul till I'm evened with him, wife for wife." Now this sounds more like an actual reason for a personal vendetta. It was true that in Venice, adultery was not uncommon, but to take what is essentially a rumor without evidence so seriously? Given the length Iago goes to bring about his plot and the tragedy it brings, they just do not add up. Not only that, but his reasons shift, making it sound more like he is making self-justifications on the fly. Around the end of Act 1, Iago talks to himself after giving Cassio, who he just sabotaged, the advice to ask Desdemona to persuade Othello into giving him the lieutenant position back. Quote, "And what's he then that says I play the villain? When this advice is free I give and honest." Now, this line's main purpose is to cheekily build up the irony of Iago's actions. In the next scene, he uses the very actions Cassio takes under this advice against him, framing them as adulterous to Othello, who then gets big jealous. But what I find interesting is that question, what's he then that says I play the villain? This is not a question asked by any of the characters, it is asked by Iago himself. Or at least the part of him that is self-conscious about what he's doing. It sounds as if from the beginning he had already decided what he was going to do, and therefore the reason didn't matter. He is the arbiter, the mastermind of what is going to happen. Verso carries this same attitude. Even before the expedition meets him, Verso has already decided that he is going to use their aid to help bring down the Paintress. More specifically, Mael's aid. He very sneakily saves only Mael during the attack on the beach and brings her to the manor where the curator resides. For the rest of Act 1, he just watches the expedition from afar and then only interferes to save Mael from Manoir. The truth is that Verso intentionally let Gustave die because he feared that her attachment to him could cause her to go against his aim of defeating the Paintress. Could. Not would. Not will. Could. Now, in a sense, he was correct. In the end, her attachment to Gustave is one of many reasons why she wants to maintain the canvas, thereby opposing Verso's aim. But this reasoning is twisted. No one can know for sure how Gustave's presence could have impacted things. Actually, in hindsight, Mael never learned about the truth of the canvas until it was too late, and so it was unlikely to have changed anything. Verso is that guy who just pushes his code to production on a Friday. He acts as though all important variables are considered, all execution paths thought through. On one hand, as a programmer, I can understand and respect the logic and competence behind his solution. Sometimes you were just right, better than everyone else, and you can feel it. It's a good feeling, and in the case of Expedition 33, we can think the game has given us enough context to make a judgment on the ending and have certainty that it's better. On the other hand, I know all too well how easy it can be to feel right, and then realize you are, and always were, a big dumb idiot who was wrong. When dealing with complex problems, our biggest enemy can be ourselves. The scope of our vision on these matters is often more narrow than we think. And when we shut out others' perspectives, we trap ourselves into following our original presumption. Earlier, I criticized Mael's ending by saying she is trapping herself in a prison of her own machinations. Since the temptation to manipulate the world of the canvas will be too strong, and as such, she will be stuck in perpetual adolescence. That applies to Verso too. He is living in that same prison. He manipulates the world not by paint, but through lies, as he steers everyone towards the result he thinks he wants. There is a good conversation in Act 3 between Lune and Verso. Lune says that he thinks in false dichotomies, that it was not a yes-no, there was maybe another option. Verso asks her, "If you were in my situation, would you have done anything different?" And to that, Lune does not have anything to say. Lune loses in this conversation for two reasons. One is that there is logic in Verso's rationale, and she cannot fully disagree with it. The other is that she is an overly logical and rigid person. And as such, she has difficulty expressing why a hypothetical, unknown other option would be preferable. It would sound irrational. And maybe it is. But there is something to that instinct to go with the other option. There is something to the sentiment of disgust towards Verso's actions. It's a heuristic. And that heuristic goes something like this. Always reject and oppose evil. Now, maybe you don't think Verso is evil, but you think Iago is. And what does evil do? It projects the worst of itself onto the world. Iago is constantly doing exactly that throughout the play. He downplays the importance of reputation when consoling Cassio, who is in turmoil after being fired. But we know that Iago cares very much about reputation. The whole reason the play supposedly started was because he was salty about losing the lieutenant position. And it is the reputation of being honest that he relies upon to enact his scheme. He warns Othello about jealousy, the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on. But it is Iago who is first consumed with it, after hearing just the rumor about his wife. And later in the play, he shifts his jealousy towards Cassio as well. For I fear Cassio with my nightcap too. He describes just the suspicion of it to be a poisonous mineral that gnaws on his insides. And this is exactly what Iago inflicts Othello with through suggestion and weak but implicative evidence. He even has the gall to point out that Desdemona deceived her father when eloping with Othello, and therefore would be duplicitous to him as well. Not only does he project the worst of himself onto the rest of the cast, but he is insistent about it. He is insistent that everyone is how he's describing them to be, to the degree that he drags Othello down to his level, making him murderously jealous and distrustful. This is not what an honest person would do. Instead of accepting information that contradicts his beliefs, he would rather change the whole world so that it fits his worldview. And his worldview sucks. Behind all the lies, Iago shows us that he is a deeply cynical person. In public conversations, particularly in Act 2, Scene 1, he straight up throws slander at women, insisting that they are, in general, distrustful and promiscuous. These comments have no utility towards his goals. They certainly don't make him more likable. It might just be the only time he's honest. Iago is distrustful of Emilia, and maybe he has some right to. When Emilia and Desdemona last talk, she shows to be very willing to be unfaithful, although that is likely brought about by how he has treated her primarily. But that doesn't matter because Iago is not interested in reality. From the beginning, Iago is shown to be a person who doesn't know anything. He doesn't know what other people are thinking, he doesn't even know what he is thinking. His cynical life of manipulation and deceit have left him as something less than a vengeful, malicious husk of a man looking to burn whatever irks him. And going off the body count by the end of the play, It's a lot. At the very end, when Iago is caught and asked why would he do this? His last words are that he has no words. And that is the irony. Iago speaks confidently that our bodies are our gardens, to which our wills are gardeners. That is to say, we are in control over our actions, that whenever we plant nettles or sow lettuce, it is up to our will. And he acts as though this is true. Throughout the play, we see him in control, planting seeds of suggestion into the minds of the cast. The biggest of these, the seeds of doubt onto Othello. But in the end, he never had a reason for anything. He was but a puppet of his own desires, and this idea of control a facade. Even if he did have a reason, he wouldn't want to express it and give any kind of closure for others to look at against this tragedy. So he chooses not to talk, out of spite, just to help the world burn a little more. This is the direction Verso is going in. He is so confident in the existing information that he is willing to throw away everything in order to produce what he deems the better result. Look at the axon Renoir painted, he who guards truth with lies. This axon is painted to represent the original Verso, but it shares a lot of similarities with Iago. First of all, the boss fight itself carries a duplicitous nature. The huge, imposing mountain of a being you thought was the boss was actually just a husk being controlled by the real Axon, the Mask Keeper. Like Iago, he is smaller and less imposing than his facade. He wears a mix of theatrical garb and battle armor. Iago was the ensign for a military commander in Shakespeare. In his speech, the only Axon to have one is almost reveling in the fact that it is theatrical. Much like how throughout the play, Iago, and by extension we, the audience, revel in just how far the ruse has gone, wondering how much more can he get away with it. For people in the canvas, this is the worst kind of person delivering the worst result. Their lives are sacrificed for a family that ultimately does not care for them, by a man who promised to save them. Outside the canvas, the ending cutscene portrays things as good as you could hope, but there is good reason to have doubts. The consequences of the fracturing, the fight between Renoir and Aline, are still there. As a husband, Renoir likely made a wrong choice. He decided to take away this important memorabilia from Aline, rather than be supportive, provide an off-ramp, and have faith that she would come out of it on her own. Instead, he rushes in and makes her fight to the very end. Life is more precious the more fragile it is. The fake family, in being immortal, is not fragile normally, but Renoir threatening to erase them does. This likely had Aline fight back like how a mother would fight for her child. Renoir could have waited and had faith that she knew better and could pull herself out given the time. She was the one who saved him from a canvas after all. Who knows, things might have settled faster and less painfully had he not put matters into his own hands. We don't know that answer, but I believe the developers would say so, as they've always portrayed the characters with complexity and tragedy. My favorite line in the game is how Verso responds to Mael when she, in an admittedly whining tone, objects to Verso erasing the canvas.
Verso, stop! You can't just decide this for everyone!
We're all hypocrites, doing the same thing to each other.
First of all, that is a banger. Best line in the game. Mael has just come into the scene after lying to her dad to his face and reprimanding Verso for taking matters into his own hands. For someone like me, who was pro-destroying the canvas since the start of Act 3, I was cheering. Seeing Verso shut down Mael like that was oddly cathartic. Because everything Renoir had said about her is true. She doesn't know what she's dealing with, and she doesn't know what is good for her. This is hyper-reality. This is comfort crack. You cannot be here. However, it took me until I read Othello to really understand this line. I had to read the Shakespeare to appreciate the Unreal Engine 5 rendered Shakespeare. It is not a refute against Mael or her side's argument. It is not even an argument. It is just Verso shutting down everyone around him. It's okay for me to be a hypocrite because you are also being a hypocrite. How about no, it's not? Miles right. Who are you, Verso, to decide this? Renoir is one thing. He has flaws, sure, but no one can say that he is a liar or that his actions don't make any sense. He has painted canvases before. He has been trapped in a canvas before. He has gone through and learned from enough experiences that I can respect his position. Out of anyone, he has earned the right to be in control. Verso changed his mind 5 minutes ago. He was the one who could have told Mile about the canvas and created a third alternative, like in how Alicia's letter suggests. But his arrogance closes any chance of that third alternative, any chance of a compromise, forcing one of two extreme bads, leaving us in an absolute tragedy. And now, finally, the whispers have ceased. I am at peace with the developers. It took a long time, arguments and supplemental reading, but we got there. It wasn't that the developers were dumb and created a good and bad ending and then just called them both bad. It was me. I had been focused on what was already known and judged based on what I could see. I had thought the presumptuous, that I knew better than the developers and that their ending was sort of trash. I'd looked at both sides of the aisle and thought that the Mael side had no good case. The Mael defenders' problem wasn't necessarily that they were wrong, but that they never fully articulated why Verso bad was bad to the extent I needed to hear. In a way, I was the one exposed for being so dogmatic in my choice. Okay, and now with that all out of the way, let's take another look at the endings. Mael's ending is a tragic take on a typical JRPG story. The tyrannical god is defeated and the world saved. Our teenage protagonist is left in control to make of their life what they will, but in this case, the world saved is a hyper-reality that is trapping our damaged protagonist, who has now replaced God. The ending suggests that she has been twisted by this world and will not leave on her own accord. They paint a bleak reminder of what happens when we stay suffocated in comfort. But not everything is hopeless. There might be a canvas in a canvas. There might be something that we don't know, that we can't see, that when we stop trying to take control and use force, will bring about a better outcome. Like any work of fiction, there is the risk in using it as a crutch, as nothing more than an escape from the uncomfortable. But in it, there is also a reward. Despite everything being set up against this, Mael still could develop herself, figure her way out of grief, and return from the canvas on her own. And this would be the healthiest resolution of them all and genuinely be the happy ending. This ending is tantamount to faith in, however unlikely, however blind, the words of Painted Alicia. That perhaps with Mael, there can be a better alternative. I would like to refer to this ending, the blind faith ending. Verso's ending is when the cynical anti-hero wins. Here, the information has been coldly and practically calculated. He seeks the betterment of his family, but ultimately a hard, costly decision is made based on where the family is, not where the family could be. Verso's ending eradicates everyone in the canvas and himself in order to sober his family into the reality of grief. Because Verso's judgment is to condemn the canvas to erasure, I will call it the condemned ending. This game is not just called Expedition 33. It is called Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Clair comes from the French word clair, meaning clear, and is used in English as a prefix for words such as clairvoyance. To condemn someone, their crimes have to be laid out clearly and then judged by an authority. Obscure is our word obscure, something that is unknown or hidden. Faith is all about putting trust in something that you can't see, something that you believe to be obscured. The interplay between these two different meanings, these two different endings, is intentional. Perhaps that is why we see the endings framed in this particular way. They could be meant to reinforce the concepts of clair obscur. The condemned ending takes the most predictable path based on what was made clear in the game. the DeSandra family are forced to come to terms with Verso's death. They are mournful, but the family is visibly closer together, all according to French Keikaku. The blind faith ending is shrouded in unknowns. The hypothetical surrounding the nature of the canvas as a world in simulation, the fate of Lumiere's direct relationship with a god, and the potential of Maëlle herself. Even the art style reflects this. It goes to black and white. In the background, the details are obscured. So you, dear viewer who is still watching and waiting in bated breath, have I now changed my opinion to be that of Sandfalls? Are both endings equally bad? You might have noticed that my tone has changed since I started criticizing Verso. Almost a year has gone by since I beat this game and my initial negative impression began. The stupid long process of writing this script has done a lot to change that. I now think the ending to Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a peak video game ending. Do I still believe that this condemned ending is the right ending? Yes. You might be confused. It sounded like I would have changed my mind, right? In my journey to temper my judgment, I took the story in again with an open mind. I recontextualized what Verso's character meant and felt the weight of the condemned ending. I strengthened the defense of the blind faith ending so far that there were times during this very video that I faltered into temptation. I shamefully wondered, was this actually the better ending? But then something strange happened. I looped back to where I started. As I was writing about both endings, I recognized a pattern. I became aware that the greatest evil in both endings was delusion. Maëlle deludes herself into thinking that the canvas is her home and conducts the same fake family Aline does. Verso deludes himself by never telling the truth, by lying his way through life and coming to think of everyone as a puppet. They each got there from different places, but both are living in a hyper-reality. I've been sprinkling in this term throughout the video, but let's actually break down what it means. Hyper-reality is the state in which the distinction between an artificial representation or experience of reality and reality itself are blurred, and the artificial feels more real than reality itself. And this is what the canvas is to a fault. For Maëlle, reality, life itself, can be manipulated and exaggerated to an intensity stronger than reality typically is. Magic that conjures the elements, monsters both grotesque and beautiful, a living plushie that flies and contains wine. Why would you ever want to leave? As for Verso, like Iago, he believes in the exaggerations of people he has come up with in his head. He believes Aline and Maëlle are weak people who are incapable of leaving the canvas on their own. And we know this because he uses people like tools, in the same vein as how we the player treat them as video game characters. After killing his lover Julie, Verso claims that once Aline is kicked out of the canvas, he will just ask her and she'll revive Julie. Just like that. With no explanation for why and how she would even do this, it is clearly cope. But the fact that he believed in it to any degree shows what he thinks of this world. He thinks he can just get his painted sister to change her mind on the biggest decision in her life, self-gommage, just by persuading her otherwise. Both of these characters' terrible viewpoints are fueled by their constructed hyperrealities. There's another meaning to the term Clair Obscur. The word originates from the Italian word chiaroscuro. It is an art term referring to the use of strong contrasts of light and dark as opposed to uniform illumination. Quick history lesson. Chiaroscuro has its origins in the Italian Renaissance, where people like the great Leonardo da Vinci used the interplay between light and shadow to add depth and highlight areas in painting, thereby making them more dramatic and engaging. Nowadays, this is basically standard, with almost everything chiaroscurushing in some way or another. But back then, there were this group of boomers called the Poissonists. who, in the French Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture argument of 1671, held the position that structure, formation, and reasoning, drawing itself, not color, was what mattered more in art. They believed their opponents, the Rubenists, to be morally scrupulous for overindulging on the sensualities provided by color. The Chancellor of the French Academy at the time stated, quote, "The function of color is to satisfy the eyes, whereas drawing satisfies the mind." The Rubenists argued that color was more important because it was the better form of expression. When we look at nature, for example, we first take in the shades of green before the shapes of trees. And in this sense, they're right. In order to appreciate art, you have to at least be interested in it enough to look at it, and people view the world through the lens of emotion rather than intellect anyway. Eventually, the Poissonnists lost this argument and the art style exploded in France, as the technique was taken further, seeing how it elucidated emotion due to the exaggerated effect of this dynamic lighting that ever so catches the eye. Fast forward to today's world, and all you see are the consequences of this approach in the extreme. Advertisements, social media, TV shows, anime, and yes, video games all use different forms of exaggerations to vie for your attention. And for many, many people, they work too well. To go back to Iago's garden imagery, hyper-reality is a pestilence that sucks up the fruits of our minds. We live in an age now where, in the last 10 years, we have gone from being worried about video game addiction to prescribing it in favor of social media addiction. Things are so dire that playing video games is actually seen as productive compared to the alternatives. And it is here, in the current situation we find ourselves in, that makes me quite Poissonniste-pilled. Now let me make it clear that I love video games. Persona 3 is still my favorite thing ever, and I would not have made this long, pedantic video on Expedition 33 if I didn't love it as well. But you have to ask yourself, what is the utility in video games? Fun is one of them, for sure, but many things are fun, and with the right frame of mind, you can even make boring things fun. The real utility unique to video games, and fiction in general, is that they allow you to explore yourself in situations that you could not in real life. And there is real merit to gain in that exploration, and finding out what and why you value what you do. But this merit has to translate itself back to the real world. Just the amount of time I put into this video, never mind the game itself, could have been used somewhere better. Now at least I can say that the process of thinking through this video has informed my view of things some. You just saw me do that in this video. But you ultimately have to leave from that fiction in order for the lesson you learned of to be of any use. Hyper-reality is the real final boss, preventing our protagonist from doing this. I really like Mayel, actually. I see a lot of myself in her. I also spent a lot of time as a child reading books and getting lost in worlds of fiction, while the other kids were either creating their own worlds or living in the real one. I understand too well the dangers of the hyperreal. Yes, Verso is a psychopath. His constant deception sets him up to make the wrong choice. And he almost did. But then he changed his mind. A broken clock of a man he may be, but it is still right twice a day. He has done me the favor of eliminating the two hyperrealities I despise with one stone. One is the canvas, the other is Verso. Yeah, I said it, I don't even like Verso. I like Renoir. If I were to be honest and admit my biases for a minute, except for Gustave, he is maybe the best character in the story because of how right he is. If anything, my main complaint is that he gives up in the end. Because what he's doing here is the same as picking the blind faith ending. It condones an escapist fantasy. This is not my Renoir. The real one would have persisted. He would have demanded the best of herself to grasp the sky. Not doing so means taking the same attitude as Verso, seeing her for who she is rather than who she could be. And that's the tragedy, isn't it? You can be pro one ending or the other, but it just doesn't change the fact that they both come from bad positions and suffering is guaranteed. It's just that I think one is bad and the other to be a personal hell. Clair Obscur, Expedition 33 is a story about sacrifice. It started as a story about the continual sacrifice the expeditioners took to further their goal for the sake of Lumiere. Verso Desandre sacrificed himself in the fire for his sister. Gustave sacrificed himself for his adopted daughter. And Painted Verso, albeit inadvertently and with ulterior motives, saved his other sister from the same fate his mother fell in. Maëlle will be devastated. The family member she wanted to spend the rest of her days with rejected her. Her one comfort has been destroyed. She will be antagonized by her sister and mother, and the conflict with the riders. But at least her hero's journey is no longer on pause. Things might not end up good, but if I dare say it, I have blind faith that if anyone can, Maëlle can prevail. When one falls, we continue.